Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to Overhead Recipes. This week, we're exploring the idea of whether or not your machine is to blame for poor extraction. We're talking about quick flow, sour coffee, lack of crema, lack of pressure, and all that jazz. Now, before we get started, thank you everyone for dropping by and watching this video. As you can see, this is our first voiceover video for Overhead Recipes. The main reason why we're doing this is specifically for coffee videos. We are not going to have very useful videos shooting coffee making overhead. So we've decided to make our coffee videos more narrational and more experimental, which would require us to be talking. So I hope you like the new format, and as always, if you have any questions, comments, as well as any suggestions on how to make the experiments better, drop a comment below. And also help us out with the YouTube algorithm. Just gently tap that little blue thumbs up like button and subscribe to our channel. It will help us a lot, help us make more cool videos like this, fun videos like these, that are here just to entertain you and to experiment on things that we love to do with food and drinks. Without further ado, let's go with the experiment. So if you own the Breville Barista Express or any other semi-auto or fully manual coffee machine, you have noticed that getting the pressure right is one of the toughest things to figure out. And oftentimes, the most common culprits will involve things like your extraction coming out too quick. You know how they always say that you're aiming for 25 to 30 seconds, roughly, for your espresso extraction, but you're probably just getting like 10 seconds or so, probably like 15 to 20 seconds, including the pre-infusion time of approximately 9 to 10 seconds. So that's not good, right? And then, the second thing that you might be getting a lot of is obviously the flow of the coffee being really fast. And with that happening, a lot of times you're not going to get that nice crema that came from the oils of your coffee. And the next thing that we will have issues with would involve the volume of the espresso itself. So you're trying to usually do 2-to-1 ratio, meaning you get twice the amount of output out of your input grammage. So a lot of times you either get a lot, and that's usually the case more often than not, than getting a lesser than 2-to-1 extraction ratio, right? It's actually kind of hard to choke the espresso machine in most cases. So with that in mind, you go into the last part with all those things combined, you usually end up with sour coffee that is just unpleasant, and you start figuring out that there are things that you might not be doing right with your coffee machine that you just spent so much money on. So one of the more common solutions that you will have is when you look into your Breville manual, and you can see that the troubleshooting section will always almost tell you to do the same things, which is 1, check your dose, 2, adjust the grind size, and 3, combination thereof, and maybe like preset your timer, so to speak, if your machine allows it. And you'll usually figure out quite soon that no matter how fine you try to adjust your coffee or how much coffee you try to put, you will never get into that 35-second extraction, including the pre-infusion time and such. So it can get quite frustrating, and you might end up wasting tons of coffee and still not get where we want to go. So here we are trying to solve this through an experiment, and we try to blame something else, which is something that most likely you wouldn't be paying attention to. And this culprit is usually your coffee beans. If you are like most people who just got started with this espresso thing, most likely you will be sourcing your good old coffee beans from the grocery store aisle. You can be looking at the Lavazza, the Illy's, And of course, you might also be buying your beans from your good old green mermaid multinational chain in it. The problem with that is most of the time these beans are relatively old, unless you're lucky enough to live in a place where consumption of coffee beans are very high, which means the odds of your stock on the shelves in your grocery or your favorite coffee shop chain will most likely have old beans. By old, I'm talking about over 6 months to probably a year or more, and that's rarely a good thing. So the experiment goes for this. I'm going to use the same green raw coffee beans from the same bag, and I'm going to roast it on 2 different dates. But we're going to extract coffee from the same date. So the coffee that we're going to use is a Brazil Santos, which is my standard favorite at home. You know, to make lattes and cappuccinos and such. I just find it to be very versatile. We're going to use the standard 17-gram dose, which is perfect for the recipe that I like. And the first batch of beans, we roasted it on October 23rd. The second bag of beans, we roasted on November 18th. So there's almost like close to a month apart between the 2 sacks of beans. And then we're going to roast them exactly as they are. And we will be extracting the coffee on November 28th, roughly 10 days past the last batch. All right? So that means the old batch will be roughly a month old, and then the newer batch will just be less than 2 weeks old, roughly 10 days old. So let's see how it goes. So first up, we use the old batch, so we pour out our 17 grams as we normally do. The coffee beans themselves, they look quite okay if you pour it out. You know, you don't really get a lot of oily beans. You know, there might be a couple of, especially those that got roasted a little darker than the other. But in general, they're fine. There's nothing unusual about it. The smell might not have as strong of a coffee chocolatey aroma that the Brazil Santos usually have, right straight from the bag. But they're not that bad. You know, you don't smell anything funky or whatever. So let's try to get an extraction. So we try to get everything as even and uniform as we can. So we usually put it in the hopper and grinder. With my machine, I currently have the top burr at 4 and the side burr at 4 as well. Yours may vary, so I wouldn't suggest you to just copy it because of the wear and tear of the burr. My machine is roughly 3 years old. We're going to skip certain things that I normally do that I will explain in a tricks video in the upcoming week. So we're just going to grind it on the naked portafilter just so that we can see the output better than the spouted standard portafilter that came with the Breville machine. I just find that if you have the spout, you know, it actually passes through the mechanism and the float a little, which kind of alters how the crema would come out. So we're just going to grind it and tap it and try to distribute it as normally and evenly as we can. So there's no special technique or whatever involved. We're just trying to be careful not to lose any grounds. And then we tamp it with the normal pressure that I use. I don't measure how I tamp, but we just try to keep it uniform. Also, we decided to use the distributor just to make this a little bit more uniform and consistent between the experiment. I understand that distribution is a tricky thing, and we'll have another video about distribution in the coming weeks. But for now, our focus is really on the extraction part, so using a distributor tool would allow us to make things more fair between the two comparisons. So we stick it in the machine and we grab a mug or grab a cup So okay, right now we're just going to use a cupping bowl, whatever that thing is called, and we're just going to tare it and make sure that we got everything zeroed out and see how the extraction goes. Reset the timer, and again, we're hoping to get at least a 25 to 30 extraction in terms of seconds and roughly around 35 grams of yield from our 17 grams of coffee. As you can see from the pressure gauge, it stops pretty much at the 12 o'clock, 11 to 12 o'clock point. And we only got a 19-second extraction and a really high output of 49 grams. Normally, we don't get this kind of stats or numbers from this bean in this setting. So let's try to figure out why this is by comparing it with the fresh roast batch. Again, this fresh roast batch is roughly 10 days old from roasting day, so it probably just reaches the degassing stage and probably technically a day or two old, from the most optimal stage. So let's just see how this goes. Again, we grab our bag and take out 17 grams of the beans, put it in a hopper, grind it, and dose it accordingly. So looking at the beans themselves, comparing it to the previous batch, the smell right off the bat when you open the bag is a lot more pleasant. The aroma is better, but that's quite subjective. I can't really quantify that. There's a lot less beans that are glossy or oiled out, by feel. But in general, by looks alone, they really didn't differ that much from the first batch. So it's kind of hard to tell just looking at the beans alone. Let's just grind it up and see how it goes. Again, we tried not to do anything fancy or add too much variable to our dose and to our grind. So we fill the portafilter basket halfway, give it a couple of taps to level things out, and then fill it all the way up. And we just leave any boulders or clumps along the way. We're not going to fluff that up, so to speak, as I normally do. We'll grab our simple distributor tool, give it a couple of spins, and again, tamp it as evenly and as consistently as you can. There's nothing special. I don't do any special twirling or whatever. I just give it a little polish just to get rid of any loose coffee grinds. So I try to be consistent with the tamping by using 3 fingers like a diamond triangle pattern, just to give it an even push, because the 53 mil portafilter is a little tricky to tamp evenly. We're sticking to the machine as usual. Put our cup in, tare it, and let's see how the extraction goes. Again, we are aiming for roughly above 25 seconds, ideally 35 seconds with pre-infusion, with a 2-to-1 output. So 17 in, we're trying to get 34 out, 35, that'll be good. Press the double cup switch, nothing has changed in terms of setting, and almost instantly you will see that the flow is a lot more consistent. It forms a single stream a lot better. It stays in place a lot better. It doesn't wiggle around because of the water. And you can take a look at the pressure gauge. It's all the way up to the maximum of the espresso range, which is normally what happens when I use this bean. And if we take a look at the overall output on the scale, this extraction clearly is a lot thicker, so to speak, on the surface. And look at the timing. This is a 36-second pull with pre-infusion with a 33.6 output. So yeah, it's perfect. So we got our 2-to-1 output, and we can compare the outcome after I transferred it to a clear glass. I should have started with a clear glass. The left one is the new bean. The right one is the old bean. You can clearly see the color translucency difference as well as the crema color difference. Granted, the older bean extraction has been sitting around for 2 minutes longer than the fresher bean extraction, but still the volume is very, very drastically different. And if you taste it, the fresher bean is significantly better. It has a rich, bold flavor. It doesn't have any sour taste. While the other one just isn't that pleasant. Granted, if you put milk and syrups and whatever, the difference won't be that big. But if you like, drinking espresso or macchiato espresso and relatively low milk recipes and drinks, you will find that to be a huge difference. So what's the overall lesson here? So before you tweak your machine too much, I think try to eliminate the most obvious problem first, which is the bean freshness. I would suggest you skip the grocery, you skip your Starbucks and your coffee, tea, and tea, whatever the closest neighborhood international chain that you have, and try to get your beans from your local roaster or any specialty roaster that they roast their beans weekly, and your packs are not like hermetically sealed in some commercial giant foil bag, right? If you're a typical home user, I think the maximum you should buy is roughly 250 grams of coffee every time. You shouldn't stock more than that. With every dose hovering between 16 to 20 grams consumption anyway. Even if you have, 2 glasses a day or so, that should last you a week nicely. So buy your 250 gram bags every week if you can. If not, maybe you can stretch it to 500 grams, but buy a really good coffee container, which can suck the air out and keep the beans as fresh as possible. But I would say that for most beans, 3 to 4 weeks is the maximum that you can store it for espresso. If you go past that date, it might be good to relegate those beans to less critical coffee products, less critical coffee drinks. Maybe you have a normal drip machine or French press and those kind of drinks that things like pressure and consistency of output is not that great. So don't throw it, it's still obviously good coffee, it's still obviously more than salvageable coffee. But for espresso, if you're going to go through all the effort of doing it, make sure you use fresh coffee beans. So also, the last point that I want to make is it also depends on the beans that you choose. In my experience, when I use Colombian beans, for example, they don't stay fresh as long as Brazilian beans. Typically 10 days to 14 days is the maximum. Past that, the extraction times can vary very quickly as it approaches the 1 month time frame. It's not as, I don't know why, maybe it's because of the size of the beans and the density of the beans. It probably releases gases differently. So be aware of that. In my experience, the African ones and the Sumatran ones are less forgiving when it comes to freshness for espresso. That's why I tend to use those for drips more. For espresso, I tend to like Brazil and the Costa Rica beans. So there you go. Experiment with your own machine, with your own bean supplier and stuff, and let me know in the comments if that worked out for you. Again, give us a like, give us a sub. Shouldn't take you more than a second of doing so, and I appreciate that greatly. See you again next week. Ciao.